We talked about for the last 2 weeks, this is our third week, I think, meeting together. We've talked about Genesis chapter 1. I said that we can spend weeks and weeks on just the first two verses of that, just looking at in the beginning, like what is the beginning? And then trying to define God, in the beginning, God, and then created. What does it mean to bara? Does it mean something that only God does or something that mankind does? And what are the heavens and the earth? Are we talking about the sky and the land? Are we talking about God's dwelling or man's dwelling? And then, the tohu vabohu and the tehom, the abyss that it puts in. By the way, if you're new, it's Hebrew stuff, right? So, chaos. Hi, Ruth. I haven't seen Ruth in a long time, so it's kind of nice to see her there with Rick Hopper. She distracted me. Thanks a lot. So we could spend a lot of time on verses 1 and 2 and dealing with all of those things. We spent 2 weeks just dealing with the entire chapter. The big summary of all of this is that God is this big, huge, transcendent God that is creating the world. But we're going to get to the reason why he's creating it, what the story is trying to tell us. We've actually already gotten to it, but we're really going to get to it in Genesis 2. But we're going to back up because we've been talking about this war that God is fighting, right? Or rather, this war that the artists, the literary people, the people who are writing, the authors of this Bible, they're fighting this war against their culture at the time. Their culture believes in big gods that are doing all kinds of crazy things. And so somebody is penning this as a war, as an attack, a polemic against them. Okay, so it's an apologetic. So it's not just a polemic. It's a defense against these other gods that are famous during their time. Okay, so I called this in my sermon a long time ago, I called this like the creation wars, okay, which is both the war that the gods are fighting, the war that the literary authors are fighting, and this war that is in our culture today as to what in the world's going on with creation. Is it six actual days? Is it 7? Is it, thousands of years? Is this any of those things? So it kind of fits all these things. So here we are. We're going to go back. I'm going to take you back to the greatest movie ever, okay, because this is a good place to start with things. And I know you all know exactly what that, by the way, so pop quiz here, everybody. What's the greatest movie ever?
Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace. You are out, and we are throwing you away and never to talk to you again. No.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Right, okay, that's what we've been talking about, these creation wars. Star Wars is the best one ever. Hey, Riston, the gods are fighting. Classic Theomaki. Thank you, my son. You're a good boy. Hi, Sue and Roy. And Kyle remembers. All right, well, then you can sign off. Okay, so best movie ever, Star Wars. So we're calling this Creation Wars. And by the way, when I say Star Wars, I mean just the original 3, because Travis or whoever said that is just ignorant of his.
No.
Don't start with me, Stacy. Phantom Menace is not a real movie.
No. The other 3 Star Wars movies were what got me hooked.
You mean the last 3?
Yeah, because I hadn't remembered the first 3 from so long ago. But when I saw the first of the next 3, I was like all over it. So,
hey, Travis.
Sorry, don't know what to tell you.
Mute her permanently. You just can't see her out. She should not be on here at all. All right, so we're allowed. You're allowed to have different opinions as long as it's not about Star Wars. So when it comes to the theology, we can disagree, but not on Star Wars.
Jace believes in the inerrancy of the original Star Wars trilogy.
The original writings of Star Wars, yeah. All right, so here's where we get started in chapter 2 and 3. Okay, so there is this epic battle of good and evil that is seeking to undo the creation or to fight against it. It's about making choices. Chapter 2 of Genesis is about making choices that are in line with the true king. So that's Genesis 2 and 3. It's the larger theme of all of Scripture. What kind of choices will you make? How will you be wise? How do you navigate life? And this is the question in Star Wars, right? How will we make the right choices? In fact, let's be honest, it's really a theme of almost all stories, isn't it? Like, what are we going to do? There's some sort of a conflict. There's a rising action, falling action, right? The climax in between, right? This is a normal literary motif or a movie motif. So the first three movies, the only real movies of Star Wars, shut up, Stacey. Han Solo is given a choice as to whether he's going to rescue the princess, right? Okay, we're all in. Han Solo is going to rescue the princess or not. C-3PO is given a choice as to whether he's going to follow R2-D2, this ridiculous little robotic thing, around Tatooine for apparently no good reason. Like, R2-D2 never really tells them what they're doing. They're just wandering around this desert planet for no reason. Luke is given a choice. Is he going to use the Force? He's going to let go of the controls, remember this, and just let the Force and blow up this Death Star? Later on, is he going to join Vader, or is he not going to join Vader, right? We're all given these choices, and you're given choices every single day.
Anakin is given the choice to choose to be Darth Vader.
Yeah,
Yep.
it'll work for any one of them. Well, let's go to the second set of theory, because I'm with you kind of, Stacey. Like, the last set is at least a little better. We get to see all of our favorite heroes and stuff like that. But, like, there's a lot of choices and a lot of stupidity going on in the second set. Is why you signed on, everybody? So you could figure out more about Star Wars? I know, probably is, right? So, like, what is wrong? Whoever wrote these stories, and I'm getting back to this, trust me, this is all going to come together in Genesis, I promise you. Whoever wrote these stories, these middle stories, I don't understand. The Trade Federation wants to kill Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, right? Remember this in the second set, some of you? Okay, and they use poison gas to try to kill them. Is that not the dumbest decision that you've ever made in a million? Like, why would you do that? Couldn't you just open the door and shoot these people? Wouldn't that be a much better job? Right in the back, lower the force field, let the vacuum of space pull them out and do its work, rig a protocol droid to be, to explode. In fact, in the movie later on, don't they go out and they kill all the remaining Jedis in like 5 minutes. It's not hard to kill a Jedi, apparently. But instead, we're going to say, we'll use poison gas on these guys, these super fast guys who can hold their breath for insane amounts of time and can cut through anything with their lightsaber. Like who's writing these things? Anakin and Padme, right? Who chose, like, let's have Anakin guard the queen, Padme, when we know something bad is going to happen with that, right? Because every teenage boy in the world wants to be with this girl, right? Anakin is not somehow immune to Padme's, like, hotness, is he? Like, she's amazing. Okay, so why does Yoda, for instance, choose to attack Palpatine alone? There's 400 other Jedi that could do this, right, Caden? I mean, you're with me on this, okay? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then Samuel Jackson does the same thing, and somehow he loses this. And then Yoda makes the decision to sulk off to Dagobah for the next generation. Like, real good leadership skills, Yoda. Like, you're super Jedi, but now you're, or hey, leadership council. Like, let's bring Anakin in let's bring Obi-Wan in to train this guy that is more power than anybody else we've ever seen. He has more mitochondrians or something. I don't even remember what it's called, right? And we're going to bring in somebody who's like a beginner. Like, why doesn't Yoda train him? Why doesn't Samuel Jackson train him? And who chose Jar Jar for the Galactic Senate? Okay, I'm like Jar Jar shouldn't even be in the movies to begin with. And Leia, they take Leia and they give her to some kingly family, like royal family. Where do they hide Luke Skywalker? With Vader's brother, right? Do you remember this? That doesn't make any sense either, does it? And, oh, by the way, let's not change his last name. He has the same last name. Of course, Vader's going to be able to find. Okay, anyway. So that was just to prove that I'm right and everybody else is wrong about this. The purpose of Genesis 1, as we're getting into Genesis 2, the purpose of Genesis 1 is not to teach anybody about young earth creation, right? What? Jennifer says I'm blaspheming, and I was right about midichlorians. Okay, good. I'm not blaspheming. There's only the first originals, and that's all. Okay, so it's not about young earth creation. It's not about teaching that evolution is wrong. It's not about any of the things that we're normally put. It's not even about teaching a creation story at all. It's saying, chapter 1 is quite simply saying, by the way, you have your I have notes for everybody. They came on the Tuesday school, and it says right there, what is the purpose of Genesis 1? That's how far we've gotten because I kind of went off on Star Wars. So Genesis 1 is teaching that Yahweh is God over all the other gods. That's kind of the point. It's not that Baal or Molech or any of these other ones, it's that Yahweh is the one true God. In fact, they organize the story to make fun of like the sun god and the moon god and the stars and things like that, right? So it's trying to say that God has power over everybody else. 2 is this, how do you make good decisions? Now you're thinking the purpose of Genesis 2 is to show how Adam and Eve are created, right? Like it's the specification of how these things think. There's so much more that is going on here, okay? So it's about this quest for excellence, this quest for knowledge, this quest for wisdom, all these things and how good they are, but that if we do them at the wrong time, then they're bad. We're supposed to do them a right way. We're supposed to do them with God, the way he's called us to do it. So if we try to gain knowledge and gain all this wisdom and understanding and things like that without God, then we're not really gaining knowledge at all. Okay, this is just big picture. I'm about to show you how all this works. All right, so God wants what's best for us, but he wants it in his time. So Genesis 2 is about the foolish ways that we choose to grow up. Okay. Is that not a message for today? Right? This is a message for parents. This is a message for whoever you are. It's about how we choose to grow up. It's about ignoring our parents. It's about wanting what's best for ourselves, but choosing to get it our own way instead of the way that God has called us to get it. All right, so that's what you should write if you care about taking notes in that second spot. If you don't take notes, at least you can see where I'm at, right? What is Genesis chapter 2? What is the purpose of it? So you're going to have trouble believing me, but that's the whole point of this lesson. This is going to be a good one. This one and next week together combined, if you haven't heard this stuff before, will hopefully blow you away. They should be really helpful. One of the big messages of the second creation story is about this knowledge gained the wrong way. So choices that we make, foolish decisions that we make. Do you remember last week I talked about little Avraham and Abdiel, right? And the stories that we tell our children. Okay, so here's the story. And by the way, just help me out here. When are Avraham and Abdiel, when are they hearing their stories? When are they being told these stories by their parents? Genesis 1, Genesis 2. Do you remember this?
A long time later.
A long time later. That's a great answer. Yeah. Probably during the exile. Right? So we think, at least I think, this is an exilic text. Or it's an exilic redacted text. It's been edited all the way up until the time of the exile to give them some kind of a story. Now, that might be strange to some of you who are new on here, right? Because you think of the stories being written by Moses, and it probably was originally had something to do with Moses's lifetime. But the copy that we have is probably exilic. So that is 1,000 years later. Okay, not quite, but just to get the idea here. Okay, that means America times 2. Okay, just so you can get an idea, think about everything that's happened since America began. Okay, and our understanding of it, and then at least double that amount of time. That's how much time has gone by between Moses and this exile happening in the 500s. Okay, so if I were to tell this story, I'm going to tell a story for Abdiel, little Avraham and Abdiel, or for anybody at this particular time. I'm going to tell this story about how we got where we are, how we've been exiled, completely exiled. How did we lose our abundant life? This is what Avraham and Abdiel are asking. How did we lose all this? Why are we here? Papa, tell us the story. How did we get to this place? Okay, little Avraham and Abdiel, let me tell you. Now, if I'm telling the story, I'm going to be telling it a particular way. Okay, I'm going to say it something like this, and I wrote this down. Many years ago, we lived in a land and all was well. We knew we were to only worship God, and we weren't to listen to any of the false prophets who focused on the gods or on ourselves, on other gods and ourselves. And we understood we have to ignore all the seductions. We have to communicate regularly with God. We have to worship only him. And we know that as we followed him, he'd make us more and more wise, and we in turn would show the world who God really was. Okay, so this is the story, or at least that's the plan. In fact, let me tell the story a little differently, Abraham. Abdiel, come a little closer. Everybody's coming in around the fire. We're just coming in. Let me tell the story. This God's amazing work in Israel. See, Israel, little kids, Israel was holy and happy. And God built this temple through his people so that he could dwell in their midst. And he gave them this king. Okay, this is what we do. We tell kids their story, right? Everything that happened. Give them this king. And this king was supposed to be a picture of God, like a representative of him. But this king, like everybody else, made this bad decision, had a choice. Remember, choices. That's what we're talking about today. And the prophets of Baal started talking about how great Baal was, and that we should really worship Baal and Yahweh together at the same time, and things started to go down. So the king knew he shouldn't listen, but it just made sense. Like, I mean, how could I not listen? I can make my own decisions, the king was thinking. I am the king after all. I don't have to yield to Yahweh. I'm a man. I'm in control. So he listened to these false prophets, and while his understanding of the world got better and better, got bigger, his devotion to Yahweh lessened. Okay, so much so that he led all the people to do the same thing. So now everybody starts worshiping other gods. Remember, the job of this king was supposed to lead everyone to worship Yahweh, right? He was to represent the great king. And now they're all worshiping other kings and other gods. The one thing they were told without question they had to avoid was not worshiping other gods. Okay, don't fall for that. And here they are doing it. It got bad, really bad, and so bad that God ends up removing them from his presence. We had a place, we had a temple, but now they're not allowed to be there anymore. So he no longer walked back and forth with mankind, with Israel. It was so bad that God just said, I've had it. You have to get out. Don't come back into the temple. You can't be here anymore. And he didn't communicate with them. He guarded the temple with a swiftly moving chariot, the cherubim, and only sporadically could they come back and see any of that stuff. So there was no connection between God and man anymore. They were in exile. They were sinful. They were miserable. They were alone. They could not have any kind of connection with God. That's how I tell the story. In fact, that's kind of how the second half of the Old Testament tells the story, right? The story I just told you, it's the story of how Israel got exiled and how they were removed from the land, and now they're in Babylon and miserable. You remember the Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego stories. You remember when they eventually go back to the land with Ezra and Nehemiah. You know the story is what I'm saying. That's the way I would tell the story to Abraham and Abdiel. Here is the way that the author of Genesis decides to tell the story. Okay, so this is during their time. They come to Dad and they say, why are we in this situation that we're in? And he says, he's such a good storyteller. He starts it like this. This is the account of the heavens and the earth and when they were created. That's chapter 2, verse 4. Okay? So if you're looking at your Bible, you'll definitely want to be there today. Chapter 2, verse 4. And then he's going to go further. He's going to tell them about this land without trees and shrubs because it's a land without anyone to take care of them. He's going to breathe life into man. That's verse 7. He's going to plant a garden, and he's going to place man into this garden. That's verse 8. There were lots of trees. There was a tree of life, and there were trees that were forbidden, or a tree that was forbidden, right? The tree of wisdom, or the tree of knowledge of good and bad, or good and evil. And there's a river that flows out of the garden and waters all of Israel. And the land had all these wonderful stones, bdellium and onyx and gold. And man worked and guarded the garden and wasn't allowed to eat of the tree of wisdom. You know the story, right? You've read chapter 2 like a billion times in your life, haven't you? And everybody always talks about it. So God realizes that true flourishing means procreation, and he gives this man a wife from his rib. It's not his rib. Don't ever let people tell you it comes, there's that. I know that we evangelicals were taught a long time ago that men are missing a rib, that women have one extra rib. I don't know where we get ideas like that. Probably the same place we get, the dinosaurs went on the ark and stuff like that. Anyway, or Bigfoot or whatever. It's not true. So the only rib word is just a word that means the side. So it's man and two and making man and man, a different kind of man, human and another human. So he's got two different kinds of humans there. Anyway, and these two were naked, it says, and not ashamed. I didn't want to read the whole story to you because I want to give you a big overview first time, and then we can go back and look at details. Maybe. But not for long. So they're naked and not ashamed, and everything is great. They're living in this great land, Eden, which means fertility. It's like pleasure. Everything is perfect until this snake comes into the story and convinces them to do exactly the one thing God told them not to do. Right? And their eyes are opened, and now they're ashamed, and they know that they're naked, and God comes to them in judgment and removes them from his presence and banishes them from the land, and the presence of God is guarded by cherubim. Right? Does that story sound at all familiar? The story that I just told you, if you're especially astute, you'll be able to see the same thing happening in both of these stories. The one that Jace told you and the one that Genesis tells you are kind of the same story. Both stories are about man being in the presence of God. Both stories have man listening to a false prophet and being removed from the presence of God. And the reason for this is because the story of Israel's creation and Israel's failure and Israel's exile is meant to be the same story of Adam's creation and Adam's failure and Adam's exile. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute because you're used to thinking about this as a single man and a single woman being created. And I'm telling you right now that it's more about Israel's story than it is about creation's story. Okay, now, I don't mean for a moment that this wasn't originally a creation story. I just mean over the centuries, over the millennium, right, that's happened at this point, these authors have begun to mold this story so that it looks exactly like their story. And that's intentional. Let me see if I can convince you. As you look at chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis, I'm guessing in your past you've noticed some weird things. Okay? Most of the time you quickly look over them because your mind tells you you know what the story is about. And when things disagree with the way that you know the story is supposed to be about, you just ignore those things. We all do it. Like it protects us. Like we know the way things are supposed to be, so we're going to keep it there. Like let's keep everything in our box, and we just ignore weird little things. Okay? We think that Genesis 2 and Genesis 1 are basically the same story, just a little bit more specific in Genesis 2. Right? But look at Genesis 2 verse 4. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. No matter what, you're going to be forced to agree that it's a bit strange that after spending a chapter plus trying to explain the creation of the heavens and earth, verse 4 starts over again. Right? I mean, it's a little bit weird. It's not impossible. It's a little bit strange. And you've noticed this before. If you're an astute reader, you've probably even noticed some other things. You probably wondered about how in Genesis 1, vegetation is created on day 3 and humans are created on day 6. But then when we get here, we read verse 4, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and no shrub of the field had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to work the ground. Wait a second. how is this working? But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. And Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So there's a swapping of the order here. What comes first, vegetation or man? Well, it depends on whether you read Genesis 1 or Genesis 2, because that's not the point. Okay, you'll hear me say this a million times when we talk about good hermeneutics, right? Figure out what the author's trying to do. Stop trying to make the author do what you want him to do. Find out how the Bible behaves. Don't put it into a box ahead of time. Okay? And that's what we do. We just ignore the fact that these are totally different orders. And we have our creation days, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we know that those are 24-hour days. And so all is well. Mike, can you see anything that I'm writing? Yes, it's coming out? Okay. Not that you need to see that. And last time we told you that it's not like that. It's supposed to be 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6, and that these things correspond to each other. We went through all of that, so I don't want to go into great details here. But if the author isn't trying to do what you want him to do, then you just kind of make him fit, right? We just try to make it do these things. We cherry pick our contexts out, and we make it say what we want, and it's not meant to say those things. So we've got a problem with the order. We've got a problem with the fact that he's doing the world thing a second time. In chapter 1, we have God creates man, and that's it, right? Or male and female, he created them. And then by the time we get to chapter 2, we have Adam, then the animals, and then Eve, right? It's a little bit weird what's happening, and you've just been told that they work together, so you're okay with that. But the reality is it's a little strange, and we can answer it. We can answer it by saying chapter 1 is big, and chapter 2 goes in on day 6, right? That's how we've always done it. Now it's becoming a little bit more specific, a little bit more detailed. And I don't think you'd be wrong by doing that. That's okay. That's an all right way of looking at all of this. But the whole text of chapter 2 has a very different feel than chapter 1. And if you're honest with yourself, you can see it. Okay, we've just hidden it for a while. We like to not talk about that. So even God himself looks different in chapter 1 from chapter 2, right? In chapter 1, God is this transcendent God that's creating and fighting against monsters, or really not fighting against them, but literally the author's kind of showing him that way. But he's God Almighty. In chapter 2, this God becomes small, right? He walks and talks in the garden. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. They're just very different. That's all I'm trying to get you to admit right now, right? God is both transcendent and immanent. Yes? He is a God out there, but he's also a God that does make himself small. So it's okay for Genesis 1 and 2 to recognize these two things, both great and lofty and down to earth. But I think you leave the story with some questions, no matter what. There's something going on here that seems strange. Definitely similar, and yet huge distinction that either the author totally missed or the author totally saw and left here on purpose because he had a different reason for writing this text. Okay, I feel like I'm belaboring this point, but I feel like this might be something that is so different than what you're used to that I need to belabor. I need to just keep saying the same thing. Okay? So he's purposely shifted his story from a large creation of cosmic proportions down to a creation of Israel's story. That's what's happening here. Creation, God creates, but God creates Israel. And that's where he's getting to now. Adam's creation and fall are really the story of Israel's creation and fall. Y'all are with me, right? Okay. I don't want to throw away all earlier ways of thinking about it. In fact, Kyle said he remembers this, and I remember Pastor Kyle was worked with me in Maryland for many years, and I remember him saying it's not necessarily that you saw things wrong previously. That's not what's going on, but that there's a new way of seeing. It's like that way was right, but there's more to it that you hadn't seen yet. Okay? And that, I think that's exactly right. And I never say that Kyle's exactly right. He's probably already, he's already moved on because he remembers all this stuff. But
Which is actually what metanoia means.
it's what?
Isn't that actually what metanoia means?
Metanoia
Way of
means
seeing.
it means to turn around.
Yeah, but I thought, well, one author that you had recommended was talking about it, that was a new way of seeing, or a new way of a new vision, that sort of thing. So kind of seeing things differently.
Metanoia is?
That's, yeah. I can't remember who, but
Okay. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah. It just,
Anyway.
metanoia is just
sorry.
is repentance, right?
Yeah.
Repentance is rethinking something. Yeah. Like I want to see it in a new way. Yeah. So yeah, there's your Greek lesson for everybody who doesn't know Greek, metanoia. I don't really know Greek either, but Don brought it up, so I thought I would bring it in there. I'm the Hebrew guy. All right, so here's where things get in your notes. I'm going to go out of order. Okay, and I've been trying to figure out how I wanted to do this whole time, and I wasn't sure how much time I would actually have. In fact, what time is it?
8:37.
What?
8:37.
37. So I have about 20 minutes or so. All right. So I want to skip this Adam and Eve as priests story, and I want to bring that up again next week because it is key to the whole thing. I want you to see that the temple and the Garden of Eden are the same thing. Okay? That's all so right now, I'm taking that whole section and I'm just saying, just trust me on this, and we'll go into detail next time, that God has created this Eden, this garden within Eden, as his temple, the place that God dwells, the sanctuary of God. Right? And I will prove that to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. You will leave next week absolutely convinced that I'm right, even though right now it's blowing your mind. Okay? Because the same phraseology, the same words everywhere are used in the Garden of Eden story that are used in talking about the creation of the temple and how it's to be done. But I want to jump ahead of that to stay on the theme that we have right now, which is making choices. Okay? And these stories are just weird. There's some things going on that you've noticed, right? We've had already, a big God and a little God. We've had vegetation stories, the chronologies out. But I want to jump to a question that all of you have probably asked, but you've been told you can't ask for the last 40 or so years, right? You asked it when you were younger, and someone told you to hush hush about it, and then you just pretended that it didn't exist anymore. That is, hey, Mom, Dad, how did Cain get his wife? Right? That's a pretty important question, isn't it? Yeah, Laura seems to like that question. Right? Or she's just getting her hair, she's just really happy about what's getting done with her hair there.
Good questions. No, I was told it was angels or demons.
It was angels or demons, right? So Cain has married into an angelic or demonic grouping, all right? I haven't heard that. We definitely get into that in Genesis 6, but in a very different way, but we'll get to that in a second. So
Lori put a question in the comment too about that chapter 1 and 2 could have different authors.
Yeah. I think almost certainly they have different authors. Right? And we talked about this in the first week, I think. We talked about what we call a priestly author and a Yahwist author and an Elohist author and a Deuteronomist. Right? So there's this old theory that's called the documentary hypothesis. And it's a hypothesis, and nobody really holds to the original hypothesis anymore, but that's how hypotheses work, right? You throw something out there and then it keeps changing and changing. But everybody, almost in scholarly circles, believes that there are different authors in the Pentateuch, and they live at different times. So Yahwist lives maybe during the 9th, and some people have said as early as like the 6th century. That means 600 to 900 years before Christ. right? And then an Elohist might be a half a century or a century later than that. And then there's this other guy, this priestly group that is bringing things together a little bit more. Or actually, in between that, there's a J.E. But it doesn't matter. There are different authors that they have different reasons for writing. And somebody at some point has compiled all of these things together for a new audience. It's kind of what preachers do, right? They take the information from the Bible and they compile it and they try to say it for a new author, for a new group of people in a new context. Like, all right, parents, those of you who are trying to figure out how to raise your children well, okay, now let's use Genesis 2 for that. And Genesis 2 is a story about how to raise children well, how to grow up, how to make good choices, how to navigate life well. So here we go. How does Cain get his wife? Well, one idea, according to Laura, is that demons and angels, maybe, right? And this is the very next story. This is chapter 4. This is the very next thing. So Cain kills Abel, and Cain is this fugitive now from the law, right? I'm not sure how you can be a fugitive from the law because nobody else exists, right? But he's worried that now that he's done this thing, that everyone's going to try and find him and kill him. Remember this? But there's no everyone. So we just quickly ignore that. We either say angels and demons, or I don't know, maybe his brothers and sisters. But he's the oldest of them. And by the way, he goes out into the world. He's afraid, so God gives him some kind of mark to keep people from hurting him, people that don't exist, I guess, but God still wants to protect him. And then he goes to a city and finds a wife there, and then he builds a city, right? Well, how did he find this woman? Is it his sister? Is it his niece? You're like, well, he probably was hundreds of years old, so maybe it could be. Okay, and we always do this, right? We have to fill in the gaps with something because we're confused. So we fill it in with incestuous relationships, perhaps. But the Bible doesn't exactly say that. We've got to at least agree that that's a little weird, and it's not there. So what if there's a much better solution? What if the story isn't about an original couple to begin with? It's about a particular group of people that have been selected out of a larger group. And we can call that creation in some sense. All right, so the Cain and Abel story is already a very strange story that hopefully tells you something is different here. Right? Or how about this one? Like Adam and Eve. Their names are Adam and Eve, right? You've caught on to the struggle there, right? Like one person's name is human, the other person's name is mother of life. Like that's like, doesn't that tell you that maybe the story has more than a literal meaning to it? And we're not necessarily saying that it's not that, but it seems to have a little bit more. So maybe Cain is going to another group of people. Maybe he's been removed from the presence of God, and now he has to find other groups of people to be out there. Okay, so anyway, ignore what you know. Remember, Adam is put into this paradise, a place of fertility. That's what Eden means. Eden means fertility or maybe pleasure, something like that. He's told not to eat of the tree or he's going to die. Okay, that's a problem too, by the way, isn't it? Because you may have noticed that Adam doesn't die, right? So God is lying. I mean, it might be that God had decided to kill him if he did that and then showed grace. Okay, that happens a lot of times, right? 40 days and this city will be destroyed, Jonah says. And then, I mean, that's a prophecy, right? And then all of a sudden, God changes his mind. So that's a possibility. Maybe that happened. But Adam lives till the age of 930. Okay, there's no death going on here. Like at least, so God has at least changed his mind or something. Maybe it means that he's not immortal anymore. That is, he can die. That's a possibility, and lots of other writers have spoken about that. Or maybe it's a picture of Israel. And if Adam is a picture of Israel, And Israel was said that when they decided not to follow God, when they decided to take and eat on their own, when they decided to do things that were right in their own eyes, remember that from Judges, from Ezekiel, right? Doing what was right in their own eyes, he said that they would surely die. And what did he mean by that? He meant that they would get kicked out of the favorable presence of God. And that's exactly what happens to them, isn't it? They get removed from the sanctuary. They can't go to the temple anymore, right? It's the book of Lamentations, the book of like Psalms, ton of the Psalms. So exile in the prophets is worse than death, or it's often symbolized as death. We're now in a state of death because we cannot come into God. We cannot be with God anymore. We've been removed from there. That's why coming back to life, right? They were dead. They were exiled, but they will live again. Okay, that's the idea here. It's Israel is going to live again. God is gone, and without God, the people of Israel cease to exist. Just like Moses. Moses had said, we're not going to go up unless you go up with us. There's no reason for this. There's no reason for us to even exist without you. It's pointless. All of life, Kohelet tells us, right, is vanity, vanity, meaningless, meaningless, foolishness, emptiness, as good as dead, pointless. So Adam does die. He just doesn't physically die. He symbolically dies. That is, Israel is removed from the presence of God. Does all that make sense? Okay. So, if you disobey the law of God according to Deuteronomy, you will surely die. So what about, like, I know it's happening in your mind right now, and I know I only have a few more minutes here. Most of you are probably, you already decided you're going to take the red pill. That's why you're here. You're willing to not take the blue pill anymore, and that's fine. And we're talking about Matrix, not any other weird things going on, but Neo. But still you're thinking, Adam is created fresh and new off of some assembly line. He's shiny, he's new, he's perfect. That's what's happening here, right? And they're kind of like these super beings. Nothing gets in their way. God tested them with this command to see if they follow it, and they didn't follow it. They failed the test, and so doing, they lost their perfection, and so did every other human being born from then on also lost their perfection, right? This is our evangelical mindset about this story. It has a long history, all the way back to Augustine. Okay, so we're talking about 4th century. This is 1,600 years ago. This story goes back at least that far. And if you stick with that story, it's fine. Okay, it's okay with me. But there's so much more to appreciate with this story, because it's not the only story that makes sense of Adam and Eve. So the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is a lot of people, right? A lot of Christians are in the Eastern Orthodox Church. We think about evangelicals, right? It's John MacArthur and John Piper and R.C. Sproul and Rick Warren and, I don't know, Furtick maybe, whoever you picture in that little crowd. But that is such a small circle of Christianity out there. You've got all the rest of them, the mainline people, those PCUSA and the Methodists and stuff like that. You've got the Catholics, and you've got this whole Eastern Orthodox wing that thinks about things, and has been thinking about things way longer than our 100-year-old evangelical church. Okay? We only just started to exist and come up with all of these theories about raptures and weirdness that is going on. That's all brand new in Christianity. As is some of these stories, so Eastern Orthodox thinks about things very differently. Okay, they don't think about it as a fall. Adam and Eve fell. That's what you think of, right? When did the fall take place? Genesis chapter 3. They don't think about that. They don't call it a fall. I stopped calling it a fall a long time ago. It's a failure to mature, failure to make the correct choices, to navigate life well. Now you've got all kinds of new questions, right? Adam and Eve don't mature. So if this isn't a fall, then what about original sin? Okay, and it might be that this fall story isn't connected to original sin. That doesn't mean that we're not all sinful. We 100% are. The Bible's full of conversations about that. The question is, does it start in Genesis 3? Should we be thinking about them as shiny, new, perfect superhumans who then fall and mess everything up? Or should we think about this as children who have failed to mature in the proper way that they need? Okay, see if this story fits. Man, I've got so much more I need to talk about. How much time do we have?
9 minutes.
Somebody tell me.
9.
What is it? It's
Nine.
already 9?
No,
All right, I have 9 minutes.
Yes.
Wait, do I have 9 minutes or it's already 9 o'clock?
No, 9 minutes.
I've got 9 minutes. Okay, let me ask. Travis tells me all the time I need to ask, like, are there questions at this point? Because I'm gonna try and put all this stuff together in 9 minutes, but it's not going to be easy. Do you have anything you want to go back to? Does this make sense so far?
Isaac has a question.
Okay, Isaac.
So you said that the temple is the Garden of Eden. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So I'm saying that the Garden of Eden is the first place where God and mankind dwell together. So he's creating a sacred space where heaven and earth collide together. And where they're colliding, that spot in the middle there, right? I have a marker, crying out loud, right? That's why I did this. Okay, so we've got the heavenly realm and the earthly realm.
Can't see that.
This place is the temple.
Hey, we can't see anything. You have a darker marker?
No, I don't think I do. How about that?
No. Well, barely.
Okay, well, you get the idea.
That's better.
Circle here, circle here. The idea, of course, is that these should be together. So God's world has come into man's world, but because they fail to mature, we have the spot in the middle is the temple. This is the place where God and mankind dwell together, in the tabernacle, in the temple, in the new Israel. So, and we'll get into even more details with that because I want to show you this in detail. That's what next week is going to be about, how the temple is the garden, how Adam is a priest in the Garden of Eden. Okay, that's hugely important. Okay, and I want to try and that's what I'll do next week as we go on this quest for trying to find the Garden of Eden. That's how I'm going to work it next week. But I want you to see this. Let me move away from Isaac's question because I'm going to answer it in great detail next week. But I'm just trying to show you kind of the big picture stuff here. We have this tree of knowledge of good and evil. You know what? I'm going to ignore my notes for a minute. Okay, I'm just going to talk. It'll be on there, but I know. Okay, here's the quick version of this. Think about this as children who are growing up, and God has said, here's what I don't want you to do. Don't do this. Okay, all of you who have had children have given your children rules like that before, right? Don't do this. So that's what this tree of knowledge of good and evil is. But you've probably asked before, why would God not let us have a tree of knowledge of good and evil? Do we not want our children to know the difference between good and evil? Isn't this a good thing? Out of all the things that you could have, that's the best thing in the world. And you're right, because God is planning on, I think he's planning on allowing them to eventually get this tree. But just like your children, they don't get it right away. Okay, they got to take it. They got to do it easily. They got to do it carefully. So your children are going to, when they're 2 years old, they're going to waddle into the street, right? What do you do when your children at 2 years old waddle into the street? You're sitting on the porch. They're doing that, and you scream, "Get out of the road!" Right as you're running towards the road. Okay, and you might yank them, and it might even hurt them a little bit, right? As you pull them back up onto the sidewalk, and they understand, maybe depending on your views on spanking, right? That's a place for them to get a little swat on the leg so that they associate pain with going into the street. Now, it's not that you don't want them to go into the street, right? It's that you want them to know how to go into the street at the proper time. Okay, there's a movement towards that. So when they're 4 years old and they live in a cul-de-sac, maybe you can let them play in the street on their bikes, right? So I've got one of my 4-year-olds, my 21-year-old is right here. He was allowed to go in the street because he was really good on the bike at 4 years old. Like he had a two-wheeler, he was jumping the ramps and stuff like that in the cul-de-sac. Okay, so he was able to do that because there was no traffic really. Okay, but if he was going to go across the other street, he knew the rules, right? You have to be with mama and papa. You've got to hold hands, and we teach them to look both ways. You guys know this drill, right? Later on, when they're 6 or 7, maybe you're going to let them cross the street if it's not that busy. They can do it on their own while you're watching, but you're watching to make sure they're doing this whole thing, right? Look left, look right, look left again, right? That's the rules that you teach your kids. And right? And a little bit later, they're playing in the street, even that street. They're 12 or 13. They're even maybe riding up to the library on their own. I'm just thinking of my Poolsville world where my children were growing up. They can go to the library. They can go looking for their, what did you guys look for? Your like Pokemon, right? Pokemon stuff. They can go up on their own. Yeah, right. They can be on their own and doing that kind of stuff. And eventually, amazingly enough, you're going to give them a car or they're going to buy their own car, but you're going to let them drive in the actual road, right? So the whole plan all along was to prepare them for the road, but not at 2 years old. So Adam and Eve they have to learn wisdom. They can't do what's right in their own eyes. If I let Caden do what was right in his own eyes, and I think Riston's on here too. I don't see Davin. He's in trouble later on. If they do what's right in their own eyes, then they're going to get crushed, right? They're going to get smashed by a Big Mac truck. Okay. So you want to protect them from that. So God is keeping them from that for a time. And then the serpent comes in, this false prophet comes in and says, you should, Dad and Mom, they don't want you to do this because then you're going to be independent. Right? They're going to be on your own once you start to get on the car. You should get in the car. You should drive the car, little 2-year-old. And they're like, you're right. I should drive the car. This is a good idea. And they put it in reverse, but they can't see anything, right? So they're just going down the driveway into the road. They're too little. They're not ready for that kind of a thing. This is the Proverbs story, isn't it? This is Proverbs chapters 1 through 9. If you're reading Proverbs like one a week, one a day, or one chapter a day, and you're just taking this for these little tiny things, it's about navigating life, isn't it? And it all is wrapped up in those first 9 chapters where this young man, amazingly enough, is stuck at this fork and he doesn't know which way to go. Is he going to go over to Lady Wisdom? Actually, we'll put Lady Wisdom on my right side, right? Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly? And both of them are calling out to him. Like, I mean, the picture is these are like super hot chicks that he wants to sleep with. Okay, we're all old enough to be able to talk about this, right? And they're trying to seduce him. Come in, I've got nice stuff. Come on over here. I can mix the best wines, right? And he has to choose. Which one's he going to choose? Well, he's a young man. So Solomon is going to give them all of these examples like, okay, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Here's how you navigate life well. You're not ready for all of this yet. So that's why I'm training you. Does this make sense? This is Adam's story. This is Israel's story. You're not ready to do this on your own. You need to do this with me. I'm going to take you through this path. When I get you there, you will know, and it's going to be incredible. And yet they chose, like all of you choose every single day, right? You choose to navigate life on your own without God's help. This is a story of mankind. Adam's, Israel's, mankind's story. It's all the same. We're all saying, ooh, that's pretty. I want that. And that's exactly what happens in Genesis 3, right? They says that he sees the fruit, right? And they long for it. They desire it. It's good for eating. And they take it. And this is what everyone does. This is a story of Judges. They do what was right in their own eyes. This is a story of David. He sees Bathsheba. He desires her. She's good to the eyes. And he takes her, right? This is the story of all of us. Figure out what it is you did today, right? And what your kids did and they ignored you. Okay, let's just focus on you, right? There's a good application. And this is why we need an Israel who succeeds in all of this, who does it correctly, who doesn't choose his own way, but says, I'm here to do only the will of the Father. Remember that? Right? This is the guy who does Israel correct, or does mankind correct. He's the true human. That's why Paul calls him a new Adam. He's a new human. Just like Adam was, only he does it correctly. Just like Israel did it, only correctly. Just like David did it, only he does it correctly. Just like Moses, Abraham, blah, 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 blah. He does it correctly. He follows God's will instead of his own. This is the story of Adam and Eve. Okay, I know I missed a ton of details in there, but I'm going to go back next week and fill in the gaps with. But maybe, because we were out of time, maybe that helped bring it all together. And I'll be quiet. Any questions?
Who was that other guy you were talking about?
Which other guy?
Jesus.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you did know, huh? Yeah. I thought that might be obvious to my particular context here, that you guys knew I was heading to Jesus. Stacy, I mentioned Jesus. Yeah.
You better.
Okay. Well, Travis mentioned Jesus. So
You agreed.
I agree. And I don't think you can ever preach without Jesus. Like, otherwise, it's just about morals. It's just about living life well. That's not the point. It's about the one who lived life well because we didn't live life well, right? The one who comes as our substitute to become the new Israel, or the new human, the new you. And by the way, he breathes into Adam at the beginning, and now he's breathed, right? Jesus breathes onto his disciples and brings them the Holy Ghost. And he breathes into you every day. That's what we call the empowerment of God, the ruach, the spirit, the breath, the wind going into us is to animate us so that we too can become like true humanity, to be the true humanity, making the right decisions the right way. The Bible is about one thing. It's about wisdom. How do we navigate life well? Even Proverbs is going to say what this wisdom looks like. You're going to get to Proverbs chapter 31, which isn't about women. I was talking about this today with somebody, right? It's not about women. It's about you. It's about man. Oh, well, my Facebook Live just died. Anyway, it's not about women. It's about all of us being wise. I could keep going and going, but this all because Travis mentioned Jesus. Now I have a lot of things I want to say. Bring up Jesus and I get excited.
Good.
All right. I guess we're good. It's got to be 6 o'clock at this point, right? I mean, 9 o'clock, whatever. I don't know what time zone you're in.
I've got questions, but I don't feel like they're that important.
Well, tell me what the questions are and I will write them down and we can talk about them next week, maybe.
So like in chapter 2, it mentions 4 rivers and they're all over in Iran. They're not Israel. So if it's about Israel, why aren't we in Israel?
They're not all over in Iran. 2 of them, we don't even know where they are actually, but the Euphrates and the Jordan, right? Isn't it Euphrates and Jordan?
No, it's Ukraine.
What is it? The Gihon, the Euphrates, I'm not looking at a Bible right now, so.
Tigris, Euphrates,
Right.
and then Gihon and Pishon or something like that.
Right. So the Mediterranean Valley, the southern Levant. Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the rivers. We'll talk about the gold and the onyx, all that stuff.